June 30th through July 3rd, 2025 is a week that's totally different than anything we've experienced. We have Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus all included in these aspects that are happening this week. These are powerful outer planets that indicate profound shifts in the collective. We're moving into a new era right now, and I feel like we're just starting to get a sense for what that's all about. And Mercury and Venus are tied up in the astrology this week too. So bringing this can sort of shift it down into our individual lives. We have so much happening with the outer planets, meaning that there's this shift in era. But when we have Mercury and Venus involved, these personal planets, it sort of brings it down into our individual lives through new ideas, new ways of thinking, new relationship structures and goals and understandings too. So let's talk about it. And my apologies there, trying to sort of manage highlighting these planets, getting the stream started, and chatting at the same time using my notes. My hope is that by adding the visuals to this, it's helpful for you if you're in a process where you enjoy studying astrology and learning more about charts in that way. And my hope is that if you are just into hearing about the astrology for the week ahead, Monday through Thursday, that this report will work for you as well. So I'm going to talk about 3 different transits, and they are especially active this week, these 3 transits. So we're going to talk first about Mercury opposed Pluto. And I did speak a bit about this in the report for the weekend. I don't like the way I sort of covered Pluto up there. There we go. I talked about this in the astrology for the weekend as well, sort of in the context of everything that was going on with this Mercury and Leo. But I want to go over it again because while this was exact on Sunday, it's still active for the beginning of the week. So the first couple days of the week, this Mercury opposed Pluto is playing out, and we're still feeling it. And our ideas, our conversations, our ways of thinking become more intense with a transit like this. The ideas, the conversations, the ways of thinking become more transformative. There's sort of a provocative quality to this, and that's that opposition. There's something sort of revolutionary about it. Mercury and Pluto can bring secrets or truths to the surface, and the purpose is as sort of an agent for change. You know, truth coming out into the surface as sort of a way to process and move forward into the new. One of my favorite things about Mercury and Leo is the way in which there's an honest and authentic way of speaking and way of understanding and way of thinking, but sort of specifically thinking about the way that we feel more inclined to talk when Mercury is in Leo. One of my favorite things about it is that it's honest and authentic as an act of self-love, right? Mercury in Leo understands that their words are valuable. We know we have the things that we're thinking right now the ideas that we're having, the communications that we're involved in, we know that we have something to contribute that's valuable. And as an act of self-care and self-love, we're making sure to show up in an authentic way, more than usual. Um, and of course, this always matters where everything is in your chart and how it all affects you. But on a general level, we can all be feeling that pull towards greater authenticity this week as we have this Mercury in Pluto. But it's an authenticity in a new era. Pluto is newly in Aquarius, and this Mercury in Leo connecting with it is helping us to connect in a different way with some of these changes. So Mercury opposed Pluto, can be, an ability for intense focus, for mental depth that maybe we aren't usually quite as capable of. So there's sort of a mental intensity that is available to us this week, a depth, an authenticity. There's a transformative or revolutionary quality to it. It's moving us into the future, and into a future. The only other thing that I want to say about Mercury opposed Pluto before moving on to Venus conjunct Uranus, which is really, really interesting. I'm excited to discuss that. The only other thing that I want to mention here is that sometimes it can be difficult conversations, but it's not that we're having these tough conversations. It's that we have the ability to have tough conversations. Again, that sort of like truth coming to the surface as an agent for change. And it's the same thing with the difficult conversations. There's sort of a way in which we're more able to take that on right now. So this week, there is some intensity and some depth to the ideas, the communications, and we have the ability to uncover things that we didn't know before. We have the ability to have conversations that are a little more difficult than what we might usually have. So it's a really great, it's an interesting aspect. It's an interesting note to sort of layer on the bottom here. And now we need to put a couple other transits that are going on this week on top of it to help us understand this energy. So next I want to talk about Venus conjunct Uranus at the final degree of Taurus. So this is exact on Friday, but it's active all week. The transit is building to Friday. So this is really the week to talk about it, not on Friday once it perfects. So we're feeling this all week. And there's a special intensity to these outer planets at the final degree, like what we have right now with Uranus. Uranus at 29 degrees of Taurus. And I was thinking about why the outer planets are so intense at the final degrees. There's something about it that has to do with the slow movement of these planets. They sit at the 29 degree point for quite some time. So where other planets might sort of whiz past the way that Venus will this week, right? Just sort of spending a day or so at 29 degrees. These outer planets can spend months here sometimes. So that in itself sort of gives us a chance even to connect with what the 29th degree is about. But also it suggests something deep about it. There's a psychological intensity to the 29th degree. And also there's something sort of era shifting about it. There's something generational about it. It's not just about us, it's bigger than us, right? So it's like the planet is ready to transition. The planet is ready to move on. Uranus is ready to go into Gemini, but it hasn't yet. So there's kind of this restless energy at the 29th degree. That feeling of urgency, like you need to do something, that sort of feeling of intensity. And we might be feeling that personally and in the collective, that sort of restlessness, that urgency, that intensity of the planet being really close to moving on to what's next, but not quite there yet. It's almost like that last day of school energy, right? When you were a student, or now if you're still a student or a teacher, can connect with that energy as well. You know, the 29th degree marks the end of a long cycle. So, another reason why I think planets can be quite intense when they're here, the outer planets especially, is that it is marking the end of a cycle. So, we have themes around closure, around culmination. Um, Sometimes there can be sort of like a reckoning at the 29-degree point, you know, just in that anything that was unresolved could resurface at this time. So Uranus has been moving through Taurus for 7 years. Anything that we didn't quite attend to, that we really need to attend to before Uranus moves on, would need to sort of resurface now. And there's something about 29 degrees where I feel like it can happen in sort of a dramatic way. But I also think it's just because, you know, when we have that closure, culmination, ending, it is sort of like the end of a story. If you were to read a book or watch a movie, you know, at the end, you have the climax, and there can be something dramatic sometimes about the climax. So, anyway, this is Uranus at the end of Taurus. And I love the way in which Venus is connecting with Taurus. Taurus is ruled by Venus. And I just like the way that Venus is sort of ushering Taurus out here, you know, sort of bringing relationships, love and beauty, financial themes into the week a little bit more. Um, Venus and Taurus is a beautiful, beautiful signature. It's a part of us that right now is more able to be sort of slow and harmonious. Venus and Taurus enjoys being in a body, right? We can really enjoy food a little extra right now. The world sort of looks a little bit more beautiful. There's sort of a security to the energy of Venus and Taurus as well, like an emotional security, where we feel we're more able to tap into that sense of like safety and belonging this week, this Venus and Taurus suggests. Um, there's also just something very dependable about it, right? So, do you see how we're talking about outer planets this week? Our first transit that we talked about Pluto, and now we're talking about Uranus, but also the personal planets are involved. So, Mercury and Venus have been involved. And that's sort of bringing this new era down into our lives to be processed a little bit more. So, sticking with Venus and Taurus for a minute, because I actually haven't talked about this signature and what it brings just yet. Um, it can bring, let's discuss that. So, this week you might notice related just to this Venus and Taurus. So we want to put this all together with everything else that we're talking about. And I still have one more aspect after this. But Venus and Taurus can sometimes indicate it can be a significator for sudden shifts in relationships. Sometimes the shift can be um, it can feel like a setback or a loss, but it's because that aspect needs to change and grow. It's to make room for what's really right for you. Things that are right sometimes can get a boost with energy like this. I've said this before about eclipses, and it can be true for Uranus aspects as well, because there's that suddenness to it. There's the sort of jolt of energy to it. So um, you know, it's that old like sort of breakdown or breakthrough signature, one or the other. If something needs to break down in a relationship, it might right now, but it's good, it's for the best. And if it's the right thing, it will push forward. It will move forward and get a little bit of a boost. Um, it could also be a surprising encounter with someone new, meeting someone new. Uh, so not just a sudden shift in relationships. And Venus is also about values. We always go to relationships, and I'm guilty of that myself. But Venus is about a lot of things, not just relationships. So it can be sudden or radical shifts in our values. You know, again, these outer planets, this new era, And then here we are coming in, and it's changing our lives, and it's changing the way we see the world. Good morning to everyone. Good morning, Miss Tell. It's wonderful to see you. Good morning, Iman. And Steve, if this isn't for you, that's just fine. I appreciate you being here and saying hello. And of course, you're welcome to move on to other things. Okay, I know astrology isn't for everybody, and that's perfectly fine. It's just one tool for introspection that we can use in this world. There are many others, and not every tool has to be for everybody, that's for sure. So sudden shifts in our values can be indicated by Mercury, by a Venus-Uranus conjunction. Not just a shift in relationship, but radical shift in values, in what matters most to you. This can also be self-worth work. And I see way more of this with Venus than sometimes I think we all acknowledge. You know, the way, the relationship with yourself piece. This is a sort of, the self-worth work could be emotional, but it could also sort of be financial. Like really thinking about how you're valuing yourself, what emotions you're allowing in, how you're taking care of yourself on an emotional level. But it could also involve finances, because Venus is about finances. So you might be processing all of that too, sort of almost on a self-worth level. And just to say, obviously, these things should not be connected. We are not compensated based on how good we are. That's not how it works. However, I do think that it's hard to be well compensated when you're feeling really bad about yourself. So I think that there is a way in which we have to open up to a level of self-worth in order to let that abundance come through. But of course, you know, things are very complicated with all of this, and it doesn't always work that way. But working on this self-worth piece when it comes to finances, and or when it comes to um, emotional stuff, there can be sort of a sudden clarity about places where you've been overgiving, about places where it isn't reciprocal, where you're not feeling safe or secure, where the energy just isn't quite right or lined up. Or you could be realizing places where you are, a sudden realization about a place where you do feel really emotionally safe and secure and like you belong. That's part of the sort of security feeling that comes with this as well. So Uranus conjunct Venus can also be sort of a creative spark. If you do any kind of creative work, this is an awesome week to be involved with any of that, because there's sort of there's an unconventional energy to this that can be really helpful. And this can show up in terms of appearances as well. So if you're doing any visual art, obviously the unconventional appearance could show up that way, but it could even be sort of like dressing a little bit different or wearing something a little bit different. We might just be drawn in those ways this week, this Venus conjunct Uranus suggests. We can have financial surprises or shifts. Venus rules finances. Uranus is about things happening suddenly. This can go in either direction, unfortunately. That's the thing about Uranus. It's always hard to predict. It's often a bit of a roller coaster. The last thing I want to say about Venus conjunct Uranus before moving on to the third transit that I want to put into the mix here for this week is there can be sort of a romantic side to it as well. It is electric in that sort of romantic sense. It can be quite passionate. There's something sort of liberating and free and explorative about an aspect like this on a romantic level. And it can also just indicate like strong feelings of love, strong love. So I wanted to mention that as well. So putting this together, we have this depth and intensity coming in from Mercury and Pluto, new ways of thinking, new ways of talking. And then we have this sort of sudden shifts in values, in romance, in connections, in being willing to be a little bit unconventional, things moving forward and progressing quickly, or things breaking down if they need to. So see, we're sort of processing this new era now for ourselves in our own lives. But let me put the third transit in here that we really need to talk about, because none of this really makes sense unless I add this third thing. And then we sort of have the whole picture. Okay, so Neptune, and this is Neptune here. I know I circled two planets, but they're so close together that I don't want to cover up Saturn. But there's the arrow. There's Neptune. I always remember Neptune because it looks like that trident. It's Poseidon's trident. That's the glyph here. And I'm seeing these comments, and I'm seeing comments from you, Randy, and good morning, Gibraltar. And yeah, okay, good to see you. I am going to go ahead and move on and put in this third signature. I was just checking the comments. Thank you for bearing with me. Okay, so we have the Mercury Pluto energy. We have the Uranus Venus energy. And now we have Neptune on Friday going retrograde. So this week we're in the Neptune station. So a few days before and a few days after that retrograde begins, the planet is basically standing still, especially an outer planet. And you might think that Neptune is going to conjunct Saturn here, but it will not. Saturn is going retrograde too, and they will move together without meeting exactly back into Pisces before shifting both of them direct and coming back into Aries, where they'll finally have a conjunction in 2026. So these planets are sort of hanging out together for a year now. So it's hard to talk about Neptune without factoring Saturn in a little bit. So know that as I'm talking about this Neptune retrograde, this Saturn energy is really significant with it as well. So, I mean, just to say, Neptune is a very slow moving planet. Neptune has crossed this Aries threshold, meaning that Aries is the beginning of the zodiac. So it's a little more significant than a planet crossing over from another place. So this is the first time that Neptune has been retrograde in Aries since the 1860s, right? So it's significant. We're stepping into this new pattern, this new assignment, this new dream in Aries. If you know your chart and you know the sector that is ruled by Aries, or if you have planets here, understand that there really is something new taking root here. Not just because of Neptune, but the way in which it's happening with this Saturn. It's so crazy because Neptune is the ability to dream, and it's such a high expansive energy, so spiritual. And then Saturn is so practical. So it's like this practical support for our dreams. Something is really trying to shift in the early degrees of Aries in your life. And it's just really just beginning. But you might be starting to feel it at this time. And I think that as Neptune is retrograde in Aries, really just for a little while before crossing over into Pluto, you might be thinking about this part of your life and thinking about, or just about yourself in general. If you don't know your chart in that way, it's okay too. You might just find yourself sort of thinking about, who am I? You know, what do I really believe in? There's something very bold and very fiery about this energy. So there's sort of a boldness to the who am I, what do I believe in questions. There's a beginning energy. We're at those early degrees of Aries. So there's that start, get things started energy. How does my truth fit in with the collective truth? You know, there's a courageousness to this signature that's sort of awakening. There's something very mystical, very imaginative about Neptune in Aries, especially retrograde. And that practical support from Saturn as well is sort of lending a hand. And, you know, there's always something a little hard to understand about Neptune stuff in the moment. It's always stuff that we understand a little bit later. We understand better later, further down the road. So it sort of feels like moving forward in the fog. And we might feel this sort of collectively and individually. But we're sort of clarifying who we are and what we believe in, especially in the Aries house right now. So we're having these deep conversations, ideas, connections. We're revolutionizing our values and our relationships and the way we present our creativity. And there's sort of a fogginess. There's a blurriness. And I think that this comes from like the huge shift that's going on. The fact that we really are moving into unknown territory. So there's a blurriness, a fogginess to it. We can't quite wrap our heads around all of it and understand all of it just yet. The best thing to do is just to be really, really true to yourself. Be really authentic. I love that Mercury and Leo signature. It's one of my favorite things right now. It's so, like I said, being honest and authentic as an act of self-love. And we're going to be working on this for a while because Mercury is actually going to be retrograde in July, at the end of July. Well, I think it's the 18th of July. It begins until August 11th, if I'm not mistaken. So we're sort of working through something with that energy, that authentic energy. We really want our relationships right now to be genuine. What's the point otherwise? And we're open to change. I think this is a great week to stay flexible. Know that you're not really going to understand everything right now. There might be a significance to this week that isn't fully relevant more until later. There is an ability to really go very deep and be very creative and sort of like spiritually aligned right now on a new mission. So there's a lot of beautiful energy for creating new things here that might be worth thinking about. I think it's a great week to get work done for sure, and also a great week just to dream big about the future. I am going to attach a couple of videos here at the end. One, I'm going to attach something about Venus and Taurus, which is such a beautiful energy, and we're wrapping it up this week, and it's worth really looking into that so that you can really maximize the potential of that. And I'm also going to attach a video about why you might not identify with your rising sign. Look at the horoscopes on my channel if you haven't yet, and they're best watched by rising sign. But sometimes people don't do that because they don't really identify with their rising sign. So check out this video if that applies to you. And thank you again, Miss Tell, for being here. And I appreciate you. And I'm great with what everyone else is saying as well. I hope that everyone has a good week, and I appreciate the support and the love for the light. And yeah, thanks so much. Have a great week.